right? And so I think that's fantastic. Well, and then just being excited about that practical hands-on aspect. That's something I think that's something really unique to to you and to a lot of people that you get your hands in it and you see how it affects people. And then you bring about the analytics or the energy savings or the conversation to the intangible a little bit more. Is that something you feel like am I capturing like your experience as well?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, for me, it just gave me a deeper understanding, with the things that I was working with, and gave me a confidence to kind of really speak to them in a way that I understood, right? It wasn't just limited to
Yeah.
like, I read this and, the socket's supposed to screw in like that. There's a lot different, right? There's a lot of things that in the field, as many of you know, like the
Yeah.
plan B, things don't really they're not as described, right? There's a certain discovery, right? That happens in those moments in real life, right? Regardless of what it is. So I found that part very exciting, and I gave me, I think, the confidence to be able to bring that excitement as well, because it's like many things in life too. Like if you're not comfortable, if you're not confident, if you're not grounded in something, it's hard to really be an authority in something. It's hard to bring that confidence. I mean, of course, it's sort of that you got to like a fake it till you make it sort of
Right.
thing, but
Well,
you have to have been there to speak with that authority, right?
I think you bring about some really good points there, and you're kind of, giving us a really great picture of why you care so much about this work. And I'd like to just take a moment and see how that passion, perhaps is collided with a real world challenge in the field and see where that goes. And actually, to that point, Sarah, would you mind popping on and asking your question for us?
Yeah. Michael, thanks so much for doing this today.
Hi, sir.
Uh, I know in our conversations that you're working with Class A offices, luxury hotels, healthcare, schools, and more. And you've mentioned that a lot of people still don't fully understand well concepts or how to evaluate luminaires and controls. Can you share a specific moment when you first realized that gap in understanding and how it was going to be a real problem for your projects?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, anytime you introduce a new set of standards or certifications, there's a bit of a learning, curve that happens in the field. There's also opportunity, right? And so you'll see different services kind of emerge, and you'll see people kind of operating as different specialty consultants, and they kind of find their way into projects, and they are. I think there's great value that new people, and new things can bring to the equation, but it's like anytime you have something new, there's just sort of like it's kind of like what I was talking about before with, picking up the books with all the different like shapes of the lamps in them and trying to going through, like you have to really do research to understand something. And the problem, I think the biggest, the hardest thing that maybe we are all finding today is just where does the time come from, to invest in understanding things, or even just making your own dinner? I mean, like, let's
So
be
yeah.
honest, right? With the demands of life. So you have to like, I feel like life is just this constant, battle between like, where do I spend my time? I could do lots of things, but I have to be mindful of where I decide to spend the time. And so
Yeah.
I think for many
Kinda
people,
creates a knowledge gap, right? Kinda create you have this knowledge gap, and you're trying to decide where to spend your time to do that, and that's the c the challenge you feel like people face?
I mean, it could. Because it's not a lack of intelligence or good meaning, right? Like a lot of people want to be able to add value. They want to do a good job. I think in deep down that they want to be seen, as somebody who adds value to whatever they're
Yeah.
participating in. And so, yeah, I just think it's that, right? I think it's and just to answer the question, clearly. I remember we were going through evaluating some interior lighting solutions, and we were looking at like unified glare rating UGR, and we were kind of looking at we were asked to comment on some luminaires, and we had
Mhm.
some great solutions for this, and I outlined them, and I I pointed out where the information that we were being asked for could be found, because often it's like you have to be prepared to do a lot of work to make things clear, right? Especially like I'm finding in our industry anyways, like the more that you invest up front with the time and you think like, hey, how do I want to be treated? How do I want somebody to communicate with me? How clear do I want someone to be? And if the answer is very clear, well, then you need to invest that time kind of upfront to be able to do that in a way that kind of allows people to answer their own questions immediately without kind of back and forth. And I find that if you can do those things well, people will recognize that and they will come back to you quite with great frequency. But if you
Mhm.
don't, then you kind of leave that they leave that interpretation almost like up to them to then kind of say, oh, okay, well, now it's one of these time things again. How much time do I have? So anyways, to get back to the point, we'd shared some information and I kind of made an explanation as to how I arrived at those solutions and whether or not they met the requirements, and they did.
Right,
But
right.
there was just one of those things where you could tell what was happening then was that information was being copied and pasted. It was kind of going down through the channel. It was coming back, and the people that were handling the information just didn't understand what we were talking about,
Mm,
right? It just
yeah,
and these are people that again, like they're incredibly knowledgeable in so many different ways. But it was just one of those things where I realized that there's a great opportunity here, and it's so important that we be that knowledge source, we be that authority, that we give them the confidence to be able to do these things effectively, right? Because there's an inherent risk that any time that you just share information without fully understanding it, right? You have to
mhm,
trust that the person that's feeding or providing that information is knowledgeable and has vetted that information and can be trusted. So I mean, I saw that as it was interesting for me, but it was also eye opening in the sense that, hey, here's a real reason why I need to make sure that I understand this well, that I can speak to it, that I can add value beyond just like, hey, I need an indirect linear. I wanted to provide more than that, and that's kind of the Omnilumen philosophy, that we really with the company that I work for, and much the same with the Illuminating Engineering Society, right? It's more
yeah,
than just a product, it's more than just an answer. There's more to it.
and, I mean, being more to that, it's not just a product, and specifically, when talk to me a little bit more about why lighting is more than just a product, especially when it comes to understanding these well concepts, and a little bit less in general, more specifically, why is lighting not always just understood at the level it needs to be, and why do people tend to just copy paste that information as they pass it down the line?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things. And you know what I found is that one of my mentors earlier in my career, I've lost touch with him now, and I hope he's doing well. And I hope maybe one day he watches this. His name is Jagannath Salker, J.R. Salker. He's a brilliant man,
Mm,
and I worked with him after some time that he spent many, many years at Osram, Sylvania. Um, but one of the things that he really made clear to me, and it becomes like more and more clear, is that like lighting is like it's an experience in many ways, right? We all kind of it's subjective in the sense that it's going to be different for all of us. There are going to be things that preferences, things that I like, things that you don't. And it's really hard to appreciate those values or like that experience on paper, right? In a two-dimensional way. We do lots of things like lighting photometric studies, and we specify lighting all day long, and we do a
mhm,
lot with lighting design. But up until the ability to kind of provide like 3D renderings and things like that, um, I mean, the best you really had to kind of evaluate a light source, really, or like what it would experience, is like, taking a cut sheet, looking at the product aesthetically, and be like, okay, and then trying to imagine that, that luminaire in a ceiling or on a wall, and then
right,
if you can do that successfully, trying to understand like how to measure light coming from it and understand how bright it's going to be, what the finish colors are, what color temperature you're going to use. So I think there's a hesitation, because if you go too deep on some of these things, it's like what I might love, like you may not at
Yeah.
all. And so it depends on like, if I need to
That's
be
true.
mindful of how deeply, we, or anyone really invests themselves, if they're not super comfortable with it, right? Like this is just, we live and breathe lighting. So we understand it well because that's
Mhm.
our, not purpose, but like it's really a goal. So if we can't do that one thing well, then like what are we doing here? So I think like
Yeah.
for us, this is where that storytelling is so important. And I think we perfect that as we go and we get better at it because we understand how important it is and we understand how few people can do that effectively. And so, yeah, I think that, I don't know if it answers your question fully, but
No, I think you absolutely you're I think you're absolutely on there. I mean, and and this is where we get to maybe dive in a little bit more, and but I want to stay with that, just that kind of that tension for a moment, where you're starting to talk about why you're developing that story to defend your design, right? And you have an imagined aesthetic that you're putting into the design, into the renderings, um, and then your clients or the people down the stream may or may not understand the concept, but I wonder what the value to that might be. But let's let's stay with that, how it goes from what hands to, for the project starts to exchange hands as we should go into implementation. Um,
yeah, well, I mean, it's such a great question because I'll tell you straight up, I deal with this almost every day, in one way, shape, or form. And really, I think what we want people to understand is that we're designing with intention, right? We're doing things for a purpose. There's a reason why we selected something. There are inputs that are going into why we arrived at a solution. It's not like I woke up this morning and thought, you know what? I'm just want this job to be as expensive as possible. So I'm just going to throw everything at the wall. And I'm hoping that, if there's a sucker on the other end with an unlimited budget and a blank check who just wants to say yes to everything that I say, that's not the world we live in. And I think that, it depends on who you are, how you see things. And so there's so many different levels in lighting, right? You have these, there's layers, obviously, right?
mhm.
You'll have a client who wants to build a building, and they'll hire an architect, right? That architect will be responsible for kind of delivering that solution, right? At a high level and sort of managing the project and overseeing all the different sub trades. And so they'll hire their engineers and all the other different specialty consultants to be able to do that. And those specialty consultants will work on, that limited scope of work that they've been asked, or specialize in, in our case, it would be the electrical engineer in most cases, right? Sometimes it's
Yeah,
also a lighting designer if you're fortunate and the project's got a good budget and it's, it's meaningful. Lighting is meaningful to a client. And so, we will work with the client, with the architect, with the engineer to fill out what they want to see.
mhm.
And so a lot of times they don't really know what they want. They just know that they want something nice, And so our job a lot of times is to try and, okay, what does nice mean? Like, what does that mean? It means different
Yeah,
things
what
to
does
different
that
people.
like, yeah, what does nice mean in this
What does it
case? I mean,
mean?
so I mean, we're the value you're bringing to this is nice, and the aesthetics and design, and you're hitting the requirements. But maybe take half a step
Hmm.
back. What lighting does a lot, for everyone, and not just making the space beautiful, right? Do you take other lenses? Do you think about, what lighting can do to help the people in the space as well, or what sort of requirements are you trying to, inject, when you are, looking at designing for a space?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, and like, kind of, I'll see if I can sort of weave this in a way that kind of answers, the original question and, is thoughtful in that way as well. So, like, I think a good designer, and I don't claim to be a designer, right? I'm a humble servant of the lighting community, right? I'm trying to help people. I'm not looking for praise. I'm not looking for any credit. My like job well done is when our partners look good, right? That the engineers look good, the consultant looks good, that the client feels happy. It has nothing to do with Mike Jennison's feelings or necessarily Omnilumen's performance. So I just want to, like, that make that clear because There are no ulterior motives. The ulterior motive, or the motive for me, is to do a good job, right? And to rest in that and to feel good, confident, and at peace with that. It doesn't matter. There's no other motivating factor for me personally. And so when we approach lighting, we try and approach it in a way that is, and based on my own experiences, just even being a father or a homeowner myself, I'm like, I want something that looks nice, but that feels good, that
Mhm.
respects me in the space, that allows me to have a comfortable experience, that doesn't make me like that makes me feel comfortable. So I'm not in a rush to leave or to go somewhere else, that allows me to, focus on the task that I need to perform, and obviously in a building, we design with task in mind and the application that we're looking at. And it's really important. It's not like a one size fits all. And there are a lot of people who try and do that. I think, and again, it's just due to a lack of time, I think. And it's worse. So, sometimes you'll see a floor plate and it's just got like, you got a massive floor plate, 25,000 square feet,
Yeah.
20, 30 different room types, and everything's got the same 2x2 ceiling and it's using a 2x2 flat panel or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And you see here, and you understand how that was done. You don't understand, oh, this person was evil that created this. They hate people. No, they don't. They don't. They're just trying to, they're dealing with the inputs that they have that are limited. A lot of times the client, we ask these questions, they ask the question. It's not like they, say, what would you like to see here? What do you want to do? I don't know. I just want it cheap. I want it to look okay. And so there's different ways of kind of approaching that. But the extras, so kind of going back to that point, the extras,
Mm.
a lot of times we will say, these things are important. We'll kind of start off like feeling good and, not falling asleep at your desk and not wanting to find an excuse to leave there, right? So you want it to feel comfortable. And circadian lighting definitely addresses that. Things like, a tunable white, right? Daylight harvesting, all these kind of dynamic um, technologies, or solutions kind of come together to provide, an environment that's just not static, right? That's just not
Mhm.
fixed and one size, like, here's your one size fits all cap and just whatever, wear it and shut up sort of thing, right? So you have a feeling of yeah, that the solution is bespoke to you. I like these things, and I think many people like them as well. I just find that sometimes what my experience, I would say, in many projects is that even when we have done all the budgeting correct and we've engaged the stakeholders and the client wants the tunable white, or they want the circadian entrainment, or they want the daylight harvesting, simply because daylight harvesting is code, there's still a
Mhm.
lot of people who are saying, you don't need that. You don't need to spend that extra money. You don't need to, right? And unfortunately, when a client believes or trusts in other stakeholders, right? And in many cases, their contractors, hold a huge um, power, in these
Right.
projects, because they're the ones who are providing the price at the end of the day to do these things. And so they have the power, I think, in many cases, whether they know it or not. I'm sure many of them, any good contractor probably should know, that they do control a huge part of this. But
Mhm.
they also need to be on side with, kind of the goals that might have been discussed at the onset of the project, and maybe aware of. I mean, there's just some cases where some people have their own agendas and
Yeah.
they want to highlight the value that they bring, and it might just be something completely different than what we're trying to do. But they might be looking at it where, what, I believe that I'm very good at finding value for my clients. And I believe that they believe that, and so, but what the thing is though, is that, we see many cases where they say, you don't need that. You don't need that architectural linear product. We could go with a product that is a quarter of the price, and this is kind of just or you don't need that recessed downlight. I've got one
Right.
that's, a quarter of the price. But there's often a big trade-off, right? There's often
Yeah.
a trade-off. But the client doesn't understand the trade-off. They don't
I think you're
understand
right.
the difference of, like, when you look at the, for just for illustration purposes, but a recessed downlight, or
Mhm.
what people call a pot light normally, right? Recessed downlight. And, there are different, regress depths from a source. So, think of the source
Mhm.
as the piece that's providing the light, and you got the reflector sort of baked in, right? And you got the light coming down from the top. But the closer that source is to the ceiling line, the more glary, the more kind of intrusive, you're going to find that lighting. And
Yeah.
so yeah, often you could get there's so much that goes into this, right? Like I know we don't have all day, but there's certain reflectors and there's optics, and there's so many different things that kind of come into that solution. But I think what a lot of people are trying to do is they're trying to find value in other ways to differentiate themselves from their competition. Often what we
Yeah.
found in this day and age where people are so motivated and aware of cost pressures, that they're just looking for the saving, but in the savings they give up a lot, and sometimes
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
give it up and they don't even really know what they've given up until it's too late,
What do you
maybe.
think? What do you think? Yeah, and what do you think they're not seeing, about that value that you're we've talked about a lot of these extras that,
Yeah.
tunable light that are seen as different things like that, circadian rhythm, um, all these different things to get that whole picture. So more specifically, what value do you think they're missing in all of that?
Well, I think it's one of those things where a lot of times, and this is just based on our own experience, right? Is that, there a lot of people are very, very concerned with like the upfront overall cost of the project,
Yeah.
right there. And it's difficult because I think some people, and I don't blame them for that at all. I think that
Mhm.
we live in a really interesting time where we're trying to make a case, you know, from the human element of lighting, right? And like and just like rethinking how we design and how we live and experience spaces, and trying to we're trying to really change a big ship, and it takes time to kind of do that, right? But I mean, you can
Right,
have tremendous impact just with a small rudder, right? You could steer a massive ship just by making a small change, but it doesn't happen
right.
immediately. And so I think we're living this time where there's a lot of people are still there's tremendous opportunity for education with respect to lighting, and but then the benefits of things like, let's say, circadian, um, and tunable white and stuff like that. There's all these different hesitations that come up, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes from a building owner standpoint or a client standpoint, they could say, well, lighting is so personal. It's a personal experience. It's kind of hard to say, like, well, at this time in the day we're going to have lighting be blue, at other times we're going to have it be orange. Or I mean, I'm just using, like, these are just
It
terrible
can be,
terms, right,
yeah.
to describe them.
Oh, yeah.
But people fight these things, right? There are a lot of people who would get up from their desk and they don't even know why they're upset, but they notice that the lighting is different, and it's an opportunity, for me to strike, and I gotta, and I mean, I
I
don't want
mean
to sound so terrible, but I mean, this is just the world we live in, right? Like,
I
if you
mean, and I've
change
walked
something.
across Yeah, no worries. I mean, I've walked across engineering floors and as well, and you go by all these rows of desks, and you see fabric filters across all the lights that they've essentially
Mm,
overridden anything the engineers or the designers of the space have intended, or they've enhanced it, realizing that there hasn't been much thought to that. And I mean, what do you think? Wait, that's some of the stuff that they might be missing. What do you think you are specifically trying to deliver though? That out of all that, what are you trying to deliver? Are you trying basing it on off your requirements? What do you want them to experience in that space?
mm. Well, and this is why I think, it's hard to decide, like, design for like a one size, kind of fits all for people to keep them happy, right?
Mhm.
Anytime that we're dealing with lots of people and we're dealing with large spaces, we're dealing with, many different, we're just dealing with many different things that people are going to find different important. It's going to be hard to please everybody, and so, but I think what we try and do is, we want to provide a high quality lighting solution in a way that I would say the majority of people will appreciate, and that
Yeah.
they will recognize allows them to do what they need to do in a way that's mindful of them. Now, that's a very kind of general way to put it.
Well, let's I love that though, but let's maybe help, I think so something we're gonna give back to you in all this is that, one of our team members, we ran the numbers across, one of the types of projects that you tend to work on, and then, just to see what happens when some of those extras that you've expertly have highlighted and talked about, um, what if those are protected and instead of cut, and what they stays in the process of getting built? And Troy, you want to share your question with us? And because you've got a great point on this.
Hi, Troy.
Hey, Michael, how you doing? And as everybody, thank you for giving us your time today. So we're going to put up a slide, and Chris, with all of these, there we go. So, Michael, I want to give you a minute because when we ran a class A. Oh, let me back up. I always forget to introduce myself. Troy Martin, I am the CFO and general counsel for Earthlight. And so I'm the typical numbers guy. So I got a pretty good idea of how people tend to look at these things as opposed to what is really going on. So I want to give you a minute just to consume the slide that's in front of you. And you tell me when you're ready, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure. It's a pleasure to meet you, Troy, here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And maybe we can guide you through a couple of highlights on there as well.
Absolutely. So what we're doing on this slide is we took your facility, and what we do on the left is we say, okay, it's a Class A facility. There's 100 people, and the solution at the cost of the solution, and we're going to use round numbers, 100 grand. And most CFO types are going to look at that and they're going to say, well, if option A is 100 grand, and you used the number earlier, you said I can get it for 25% of that. Why wouldn't I go do that? And most people are going to do that. They're going to go for the lower cost alternative. And what Earthlight is bringing to the universe, so to speak, is what is the cost of that decision? So look at the top right, 158,000 per year. So we're talking $1 million decision. Just assume this light's in place for 7 years. Maybe it's 10 and it's $1.5 million. So that $75,000 decision that somebody makes today is costing them upwards of $1 million of human value, productivity. All of that is spelled out. And you said it earlier, or somebody did, falling asleep at their desk. They're mad and they don't know why. And it's all because light impacts health, light impacts productivity. And the point of this slide and what we're bringing to bear and what the solution is bringing to bear is taking what is proven science into the built environment and putting it in the hands of the architects, the designers, the engineers, the contractors, and the owners so that they're looking at the right numbers. I've described it in other conversations. It's a paradigm shift. It's how you think about it today versus truly how you should be thinking about it. And I think until you put numbers in front of people, they just don't get it.
Well, I just was
the numbers
thinking
are
too.
compelling. I'm sorry,
I
Chris.
think
Go
I
ahead.
just sorry. I was just thinking about people are wondering why they're angry, and I think we had to say we've normalized this for average coffee consumption throughout all this. So everybody's got that taken out of the equation, and we're just looking at the dollars now, right? But yeah, well, but throughout all this, what specifically do you want? I think there's a question you wanted to gear back
There,
towards Michael here as well.
yeah, it's almost like, Michael, when you think about this type of solution being available in the hands of the designers and the engineers, what do you think this would be worth? What do you think somebody would be willing to pay to have this type of information at their fingertips, such that when they go into that conversation, when they get value engineered out, they have better information. They have, I don't know, the basis for an argument that puts them in a better position to preserve their preferred design. What's that
Right.
worth?
Right. And I mean, it's a great question too, right? And like, and it's something to think about, really. It's almost like something you want to frame to someone else. Like, what is it worth? What is it worth to you giving up these things? And I love the question. It's really hard to put a dollar value on something when it's like, what is your health worth to you? How do you put a dollar value on it? And I think it's about, kind of this, going back to the opportunity that I mentioned here of kind of being in an interesting place where we actually have tools and, science and equipment, technology to kind of solve some of these problems. And there's a great opportunity here to educate people that it's actually possible to do these things. And that we also have to be able to demonstrate to them in a way that's beyond reasonable doubt that these are truthful statements, and that these are real expectations that you can have and that are tested, right? And that stand that's the scientific method. And so I think that these tools are powerful because they give people the like they equip people to be able to kind of have a rebuttal, when these
Mhm.
things might start to go away, right? And they start to slip, and you can see things, and everyone's been here. I've been in so many projects where I know exactly what it looks like when things are going good, and exactly the questions that are asked. And so it's sometimes not so much what you hear, it's what you don't. And then you can see it,
Mm,
like, just it's moving slowly away.
yeah.